That's such a good question. Yeah, traditional recruitment methods are a little antiquated, I think is the kind way of putting
Sure.
it. Much of that is based in buying contact information of physicians, lists from various sources, and then putting that in the hands of the recruiters to just do all the cold outreach, the inundation of the inbox and the phone and text messages and the whole deal. And so that's kind of the existing way of doing it, or using agencies to deploy a similar method on your behalf, posting jobs on job boards, that kind of thing. But it's definitely not, it doesn't favor the physician approach. And, years of working closely with resident physicians and just physician job seekers in general, as well as hiring and leading teams of recruiters, I was like, this is not syncing up. This is not a thoughtful approach for highly trained, highly educated physicians.
Welcome to Medical Money Matters, the podcast where you can find experts, answers, and resources so that you can achieve mastery over the financial and business aspects of your practice. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. I am joined today by Kristi Olsen, founder and chief strategy officer at Beginly Health, which is an innovative new digital platform for physician recruitment. Kristi has a wealth of knowledge in the physician recruitment space, having successfully recruited hundreds of physicians for a regional health system that she and I share as alumni, same health system we both grew up in. And she did that for the first many years of her career. So I am excited that she's here with us today, as recruitment is one of the things I hear repeatedly from administrators, physician owners, and CEOs. So Kristi, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm delighted that you're here. Well,
Yay.
let's just jump right in, because
Yeah.
Beginly really emphasizes a physician-led approach to job matching. And so I'm curious to hear from you how this differs from traditional recruitment methods, and then what advantages it offers both physicians and medical groups.
That's such a good question. Yeah, traditional recruitment methods are a little antiquated, I think is the kind way of putting
Sure.
it. Much of that is based in buying contact information of physicians, lists from various sources, and then putting that in the hands of the recruiters to just do all the cold outreach, the inundation of the inbox and the phone and text messages and the whole deal. And so that's kind of the existing way of doing it, or using agencies to deploy a similar method on your behalf, posting jobs on job boards, that kind of thing. But it's definitely not, it doesn't favor the physician approach. And, years of working closely with resident physicians and just physician job seekers in general, as well as hiring and leading teams of recruiters, I was like, this is not syncing up. This is not a thoughtful approach for highly trained, highly educated physicians. It just didn't feel good for me. So, we took a step back and said, hey, what if we thought about this in a similar way as a dating app,
Okay.
right? Tell me about you, physician. What's important to you clinically, but also in your personal life, professionally. And then we will go use our matching algorithm to tell you what positions might be good for you based on the things that you're telling me about you. So really putting the control in the hands of the physician. And then to take it a step further, even after we match and bring these things forward to them, we give them the opportunity to review the jobs in detail and then further make the decision about whether talking to a recruiter or a hiring professional with that organization is interesting to them. So they get to make the decision about releasing their contact info as well. So it's really, we want them to tell us about themselves, and we'll go tell them where these things exist. That lineup is good fits. So yeah.
So refreshing. Thank you. And it also sounds like it really is designed to honor the time of both parties, actually. But
Totally.
the physician that's looking for a new role, they can be really focused about that. And the groups that are recruiting too, it really helps. Not the shotgun approach, right? It's much more targeted and focused. I love it.
Yeah.
I love
There's
it.
definitely an efficiency play there. It's letting technology, thoughtfully deploying technology to bring some efficiency to what is otherwise a not efficient process, I guess you could say. But so satisfaction and efficiency all in one. That's the goal.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I'd love to take a step back and kind of plumb some of your experience in the industry to think about the role of external recruiters. So for our audience, when should a medical group consider partnering with an external recruiter? And then what criteria should they use to really think about selecting the right partner? Other than just
Yeah.
1-800 call Kristi, right? Because that's a good
Yeah,
place to
exactly.
go.
Start
Yeah.
with me. No, but really, I think the partnership with external recruiters is important because for so many groups, you don't really have a choice. If you're not large enough to have an in-house recruitment team that you're deploying, all the time, you have to do something when somebody's retiring or somebody leaves. And so it feels as though those are your choices, right? You could try to post with that, we call it the post and pray method. So you could try to put some jobs on job boards or on association websites or whatever, but you do often end up having to tap an agency. And so I will just say that some are better than others. And if I were looking at an agency, I would look for one that had more of a regional accountability. So you're not, if you're based here in Oregon, you're not hiring a team that's based out of New York that doesn't understand the culture or the vibes of the market. And
Yeah.
also, these agencies have basically these, CRMs full of physician names, and they tend to be fairly regionally centric. And
Yeah.
so, tapping into somebody who has that is important. But I would, before doing anything with external, the power of referrals can't be understated. And so making sure that you've really deployed your existing physicians in your clinic to tap their networks to make sure they're telling people about these openings. I would just really start there. Potentially even, local associations, their career fairs, and that kind of thing. I would go there first. And then again, agencies, they vary. And so here's just like a little secret is you can do a contingency arrangement or you can do a retained arrangement, right? And so if you're willing to pay in a retained model where you give them a little bit upfront, you're going to get more, they're going to dedicate more time to your job. So it's a little scary to outlay cash up front because there still is no guarantee that they're going to find you somebody, but at least you can semi guarantee they're going to give you a little bit more attention.
Got it.
So,
Got it.
yeah.
That's great advice. I love it. Well, and you talked a little bit about the sort of regional specificity, which is great for
Mhm.
our audience, and also the vibe. And I think about that, like Pacific
Mhm.
Northwest is a very different,
Yeah.
professional vibe and work vibe from, say, the East Coast or the South.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's, I think, really great advice. And that's a wonderful segue for us to think about organizational culture. So, sort of regional culture, but then also
Mhm.
organizational culture. So, talk a little bit about how clinics can effectively highlight their culture and values to attract
Mm.
physicians that are really going to be a good fit.
Yeah, I think this is so important and it's often overlooked. I think, so many organizations start at the top of like, we're going to attract people with big salaries and big sign-on bonuses and that kind of thing. And listen, like some of this stuff is table stakes anymore, but really showcasing the culture in the clinic is going a really long way. It's hard to do in a job description. You can try, and we try to build it in our tool opportunities for there to be a better storytelling moment. But
Mhm.
I think when physicians come in for site visits, being able to show, I was just talking to one of our friends, mutual friends, who's been a physician leader for a long time about this, and that so much of it is if you're a younger physician coming in, that they can look around and say, oh, this is a physician with young children, or that just sort of like they're on the same page as me. There's definitely sort of a old school mentality as it comes to the way that physicians practice. Older physicians tend to say like, I can't believe anybody wants to work partial schedules and they don't want to, work 80-hour weeks. And so there's a little bit of this layer of judgment about the newer generation of physicians. But you know what? It's almost everybody coming out of training wants to practice in a way that allows them to have a life. And so being able to showcase that when people come in for visits and when you're talking to them on the phone is incredibly important. Being accommodating to that reality will go a really, really long way.
That's
So,
fantastic. Well, it's great advice too to think about if you're the administrator or the physician in charge of the recruiting, is to
mhm.
really think about, what is the vibe that your group gives off. And if you have
Yeah,
mostly, the old guard that, as you say, are, well, I had to work 80 hours a week through residency.
exactly.
Everybody else should too,
Yeah.
that isn't going to sell it to the new
No,
generation coming out. Yeah.
no, nor is it going to lead to, long-term retaining of them either, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point. But
Yeah.
I think there's a tendency because recruitment is really hard right now to just sort of do whatever you can to get somebody in the door. And ultimately, that's not going to drive that satisfaction on either side. So really emphasizing the culture of practice and And often, what's really interesting too is I think sometimes clinics don't even really know, or groups don't even really know what their culture is. Like, what is it about the culture of our group that we want to emphasize?
Yep.
And so, doing a little bit of that before you start hiring, and what kind of person really do we want to join this
Yeah.
group,
Yeah.
can go a long way. Because I think that gets sort of passed over. It's just, let's just go find somebody. And then you can, that can lead to mismatch too.
That is also a great insight. We
Yeah.
do when our group does strategic planning, we actually spend time on mission, vision, values, and we'll go back to the
Yeah.
group and say, if you
Yep.
already have them, let's go back and check out, do they still resonate for you, and do we ratify these and move on, or do we want to make some changes? And the very
Exactly.
next thing we talk about is their culture, and we say, what
Yep.
is your culture? And there's always a little bit of quiet after we ask that question. People sit in their chair, and
And
frequently,
would
and
everybody say the same thing? That's the
yeah,
interesting
well,
part too.
we
Yeah.
put it up on a flip chart, so it's like, let's at least try to get some consistency in this room if we have all the
For
leaders sitting in
sure.
the room. But frequently, and I'm sure you see this in practices too, culture sort of happens by happenstance. It's sort of
Hmm. Hmm.
accidental, and frequently it's driven by, if there are one or two big personalities in the group, that tends to drive the culture too, and maybe not exactly where you want it to go. So
Yeah.
it's
Yep.
lovely to get some clarity on what do you want the culture to be.
Mhm.
Well, that's
Yeah,
a
I think
great,
it's also one other
yeah,
piece is that what's unique about, I think, culture is that it's not like organizationally, there's not always a culture. I mean, there can be sort of the mission, values, et cetera. But I mean, I remember recruiting for a large health system and having 40, 45 different primary care clinics, each of which had their own culture.
yes.
And so being really thoughtful about that too, that, you interviewing at different places can really mean something very different to people because
Hmm.
they're going to get a completely different vibe. So,
Yeah.
just being aware of that, I think, is super important.
And that's a great point. In the larger groups as well, there's always sort of that overarching culture and the sort of what we say
Mhm.
our mission and vision and values are.
Exactly.
And each location really does have
Yeah,
its own, those are the people you hang out with minute by minute, hour by
exactly.
hour, day by day. And so that, yeah,
Yep.
that really can have, very different flavors from one
Yep.
location to the next. So yeah,
And
that's well, I would love to think about, sort of the end of the recruitment process and kind of think about sealing the deal. So, in your experience, what are the key factors that influence a physician's decision to accept a particular offer? And then how can groups assure that they are addressing those factors effectively?
Yeah, it's so interesting talking about this because I think when I first started my, physician recruitment journey, it was all about comp. It really did feel like, okay, whoever can be the most competitive with, the package they're putting forward. And it's just not that anymore. I will, with the large caveat that there's some specialty nuance to this that
Sure.
sometimes that really is a driving force. But, if we're thinking about maybe just, especially primary care, I'll tell you, and I think I probably told you the story that I was just working with a senior resident, and she opted for taking a role with an FQHC because the things that were most important to her were patient populations that she was serving, ability to speak Spanish in the clinic, and having some teaching opportunities. And as I'm coaching her through this process, I said, you're leaving about $100,000 on the table. And she said, yeah, I know. And she's intentionally making that choice. And
Mm,
so sealing the deal will look different for everybody. And when I'm talking to different practices, I emphasize the fact that, put your best foot forward as far as compensation is concerned. Do what
yeah,
you can, be competitive if you can be, and then emphasize the other things in clinic, the clinical support tools. Do you have AI
yeah,
scribing? Do you have inbox management tools? What's your nurse to physician ratio? How much time are physicians spending after they see patients, in the EMR and documenting stuff? So really painting a picture of the lifestyle that they can have in the clinic
mhm,
is going to go a really long way. And so you can really make up for the comp and the, either lack of incentive or whatever it is with some of these other things, giving
yeah,
people the opportunity to feel like they have a seat at the table, that they can build a
mhm,
practice around things that they've become really passionate about. It can really change the tune of a conversation. So I wouldn't say that lean in and just go all in on comp. It's going to solve the problems. You've got to be looking at the non-comp stuff in order to seal the deal these days. So,
I love it.
yeah.
Well, you and I talked about this a little bit earlier, and I wonder if you could comment a little bit on although it's not all compensation, when groups make an offer to
Mm.
a physician how they can package that in a way that it's easily understandable, especially if it includes work RVUs or something like that,
Oh
which
my
you and I
gosh.
both know a lot of physicians don't really understand. So,
Y-
what would you say to groups that want to package something that's easily understandable?
I would, take the time to walk people through it. I think a lot of people just make the assumption that physicians, and especially folks coming out of training, that they understand it at all, and they really don't. Often, the first time they see an offer will be the first time they see the term work RVU. And so making them feel like they actually understand what their role is as it
Mhm.
pertains to the comp that they're going to see is really important. I think being able to spell out, other opportunities for them to earn additional income if that's important to them. But yeah, I mean, just not assuming that they know what you're talking about will go a long way, and spending the time to make them feel like, okay, I get this. I understand how I can play a role in this particular practice and how I influence my own compensation. And then, one other thing, and this is funny because I know it to be true, but we had one of our resident advisors was talking to us about when he took his job as cardiologist, and he was saying that his ultimate decision came down to the fact that he was made to feel very special.
Mm.
And I get it. It's like this red carpet thing. Some groups are really good, and some secrets for hiring people is like assign a physician leader to call these folks, tell them how much they enjoyed the interview. This red carpet thing really goes a long way. Don't make them feel like they're a dime a dozen, or like that, we have tons of people to consider.
Yeah.
That doesn't really work,
Yeah.
especially if you don't. But really, we can see you in this clinic, and that making them feel special thing. Obviously, they haven't had a lot of that throughout the course of their training. And so bringing that forward and being really responsive and thoughtful will go a long way too. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I
yeah.
used to encourage clinics to literally, and this is again a little old school, put together a packet that they could give to
Yeah.
the candidate
Yeah. Oh,
that
yeah.
was something they could take with them that had, information about the clinic, mission, vision,
Yeah.
values, all of that,
Yeah.
a little bit of who we are, and then some local information if the candidate was coming from out of town.
For sure.
So those are things I think sometimes we forget as we're
Mhm.
busy administrators running around trying to coordinate a visit for a
Yeah.
candidate, and we forget to do the gift wrap part of it. It's when you give the gift, the packaging has to be a part of it. I
Matters for
always like
sure.
to say to our consulting team, it's a little bit of theater, but it's important. Yeah.
Yeah, and you kind of think that it wouldn't be that important, but it's been definitely verbalized a couple times to me in the last year, and so anyway, it's worth mentioning. But and even just, if you're a smaller group, I think that stuff really does go an extra long way, because to know that the larger entities are doing stuff like that, goodie bags at hotel rooms, and they
Yep.
have obviously more resources. But
Mhm.
anyway, so yeah, try to compete in the soft stuff too.
It's not terribly expensive to make a gift basket land in a
Yeah,
hotel room. Yeah, that's
exactly.
great. That is great advice. Well, and that sort of leads into thinking about retention, and
Mm.
once you get these candidates here, you do all this work, you go to all the expense. So beyond recruitment, what strategies do you recommend to your clients to ensure long-term retention of physicians?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, in my last role, we didn't have a big hand in the retention, but my purview comes from the people that I did talk to and why they were looking for jobs, right? And
Mhm.
why they left. And I think we're hearing a lot, and I've referenced this already, but this sort of like newer generation of physician is, again, like their entire identity is not being a doc. Like it's not, many of them will, their family first, or their hobby first, or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. And so recognizing that, first of all, building room in the way that you run the practice to accommodate that. Again, I see so many groups throw money like, oh, at the end of 2 years you'll get this retention bonus, and I just don't. That's just not it. That's just, I think it's a part of it if you're behind in comp, and it's kind of a leveling thing, but it's really the ability to make a physician in your group feel like they have a say, that they're heard. And, again, the camaraderie, if that's what they're looking for. It's so much more about the other stuff with this newer group than it is about throwing money at a problem. So that feels a little bit vague, but I mean, I think every group knows what they should be leveraging within their
That's
clinic.
great.
And it goes back to also, I think you and I have talked about this before, is like hiring the right people in the beginning
Yes.
will also yield better retention. And because it is so hard to recruit, it's easy to just hire. And I think that's okay if you can also understand that that may lead to more turnover later, but really focusing on the things that will make a really good, physician in your group, and then looking for that person should sort of in and of itself support the retention.
Oh, well, to your point, hiring the right person, I love to
Mhm.
think about our advances in technology. And I think your platform at Beginly is a great
Yep.
example of taking some technology like dating websites and
Mhm.
matching algorithms that we know about and
Yeah.
applying that in the business setting and in the healthcare setting. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how technology enhances the recruitment process and then, what organizations should be looking for in terms of recruitment technology solutions.
I mean, more and more things are coming out, TBD on whether they last. I mean,
Yeah.
technology is, it's funny because while technology, the space really needs new technology, it's also an audience that's a little bit resistant to
Oh,
technology.
healthcare is eons behind with all of our
Yeah.
technology. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's always this, like, you have to be careful how much you talk about AI or how much you're
Right.
talking about tech in this space.
Yeah.
And, I think the reason we brought Beginly forward is I kept thinking about the audience that we were working with. And this should be recognized, with the part that we do, but also the rest of recruitment is that this is not a generation of people that jumps to get on the phone. I always say, like, how many people in their 20s have ever made a dinner reservation via phone call? There's this sort of reluctance to get on the phone to learn about things. They would much rather learn about things, do their
Oh,
own research,
yeah.
and then talk to somebody when they have to. So that was
Got it.
kind of the intention of Beginly, is like create a space where organizations can do that storytelling and take a moment to be okay with that reality of the
Hmm.
audience that they're
Hmm.
attracting, and be transparent. This is something that I think is really missing in this industry right now. Is this the pendulum sort of swung from, one end to the end of being as vague as possible,
Mm,
so that you're sort of like dangling this carrot, but nobody wants that. I
right.
wouldn't even want that, right? Just,
Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah.
physician. I loosely know what I'm looking for. Tell me the details, and then allow me to make a thoughtful decision based on the details of your role. So anyway, I think when you're looking at technologies, it's important to think about the customer or the end user. And otherwise, a technology is just a technology, trying to solve something that, or adding to an already troublesome. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff in the recruitment space right now that's trying to pinpoint, it's all about pipeline, as trying to pinpoint the best doctor for your job based on a series of things. But it's not addressing the engagement part, because if you really think about what's happening in this industry, because so many people with this shortage, so many people are after the same small pipeline of people. Inboxes are flooded, phones are flooded, and as such, everybody, these physicians are just deleting everything. And
Yeah.
so, teeing up a solution that just gives you more pinpointed names doesn't
Mhm.
actually get you on the other side of the problem, which is like getting people to see you or pay attention to you. And so I think that's just sort of the great reckoning in the space right now, is whoever can get on the other side of the engagement
Mhm.
dilemma is really where we're
Mhm.
at. So
Got it. Got it. Well, yeah,
yeah.
and having the technology that does the matching again seems to be
Mhm.
really respectful of their time and not flooding their
Right.
inbox. So yeah,
Right.
again, we're back
Yeah.
to sort of the I don't know if it's a good analogy, but it's more like the sniper instead of the shotgun, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty targeted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think the other thing that's important to think about too is the reach. And I say, what I mean by that is, it's hard for a smaller group to show up right now, whether it's,
Mm-hmm.
search engine optimization or whatever it may be. It's
Yeah.
expensive to be seen anymore.
Yeah.
And it's also expensive to be on a lot of the existing tools. And so as a small group, you're sort of like, what am I supposed to do to
Yeah.
make myself show up? You can Google family medicine in any given area, and you're going to see the biggest players, the ones who are spending
Hmm.
the most money
Hmm.
to show up.
Yeah.
And while that's fine if you understand that, that's also quite limiting if you're, a
Right.
smaller group, because the
Right.
reality is, like, many of these physician job seekers are actually looking for the sort of opportunity that an independent group has to offer, but they would never know that those groups are hiring.
Right.
And so, yeah, bringing some equity to the process is important to us.
A little bit of leveling
Again,
the playing field.
And it's a leveling of the playing field because if you can really think about like this is actually about the physician and what they want, not about the employer and how much money they're spending. It matters to see all the things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's important for the ecosystem of healthcare. So yeah.
I love the egalitarianism of that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what everybody's talking about, which is physician burnout. And thinking about, that is a significant concern for the market. And this is probably a little bit of a given, but think a little bit about how the recruitment process can be brought to bear on that burnout. And as you and I said, when we were talking earlier, burnout is the reason then people call you, right? It's like, okay, I've got physicians leaving or a lot of early retirements, which we're still seeing in the market, all that's happening. So how do you think about burnout in the physician world?
I think about burnout a lot because I think everybody's thinking about burnout a lot in the physician space, but just watching sort of this trend of physicians backing FTE down, there aren't a lot of physicians, I don't think, working full schedules right now. And, when you talk to them, many of them say it's not because I don't like to work hard. It's because I don't, especially, I think about the primary care space or some sort of like space where every day you're walking into the same clinic and you've got, I don't know, 18 to 25, 30 patients on your schedule every single day. I mean, I think anybody, if that's what you did every day, you'd start getting burned out. And the heaviness of the work, I mean, layer that on top. And so I think a lot about the physician workforce shifting away from wanting to do that full-time, same thing every day, all day, and looking to diversify the way that they flex their skill sets. And I think it's really important. So, we don't want people leaving medicine altogether. So if you can accommodate allowing people to have a mix of responsibility, I think that's going to go a long way. But ultimately, too, so much of burnout, I think, starts at the very beginning in the recruitment process. And I've said this a couple of times, but everyone is quite desperate to hire and will make accommodations. And I hate to say this, but there's lots of times people will say like, we just need a pulse, you know what I mean? And it's like, okay, I get it. And you're going to you can do that. You can recruit in that way, but don't anticipate people sticking around for very long. So I feel like a lot of burnout can be addressed by, a lot of the things we've already talked about in this is that identifying what's important to your group, like what a good fit actually looks like, and really being thoughtful about hiring that kind of person. And then thinking about organizationally how much flexibility you have to meet people where they are can really kind of aid in that burnout.
No, that's really insightful. The statistics are pretty staggering. And it seems like most everyone who worked through the pandemic and is still practicing, I agree with you. They've turned down the volume a little bit if they're still in it. And so many early retirements, and I just, on the one hand, I think hats off to you and good for you for taking care of your own health. And I worry about our industry still, that we're in this recovery mode and it doesn't feel like we're coming out of that all that fast.
I agree. And we're not training more people than we used to. And so figuring out how to support the the folks that are coming out is really important. But we look at the data in our tool too, and it's like one of the questions we ask is how much they want to work, get a sense of if they're coming out gung-ho, and the majority of the people who are answering that question do not select full-time.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that's excellent for our audience to know then. If you're searching for someone who wants to work full-time, get really clear about what that means in your group, because every group has a slightly different definition of full-time. And then understand that you might be passing up on some really good candidates that might only want, 0.8 or 0.75 or something like that.
Or figure out how to make full-time be a 4-day work week or something like that. That would also, a lot of people are doing that.
Yeah, we have a lot of clients who are doing that, and they'll say, contracted 32 hours a week, patient care time, and then you're still responsible to get all your charting done, and so maybe that happens on your, your quote day off or your day not in the office, but it's fantastic. Well, how about thinking a little bit back to our conversations about culture and how organizations can really set themselves up for success in recruiting. One of the other topics we hear about a lot, we could talk about a lot, is transparency. And so I'm curious to hear from you about how transparency and job roles and expectations and organizational challenges, not that we want to hang out all the dirty laundry, but, to talk about that and how that impacts the recruitment process and then subsequently candidate satisfaction.
Yeah. I mean, we said this a little bit too about what people want to read. They want to see all the things. I often say to the folks that are building out their jobs in our tool that whatever the medical director says in their first call with the candidate, put that in there. What are the selling points
Yeah.
about your organization that you say on the phone? And also, I think it's not a bad thing to be authentic and human and say, I mean, do you have to put it in your, job description? Maybe not, but in your phone call saying like things you're working on. I think people really value that just being authentically like who you are, you're gonna do better in the whole process. But yeah, I don't, this sort of like, there's also this, it's really funny, this sort of general idea that like, we're not going to put salary, we're not going to, and now there's some pay transparency laws coming into effect, but like, number one advice is put your salary in there. Again, we'll help you, but otherwise like help you understand whether you're competitive in a salary perspective. And if you're not, make up for it in other ways. And if you are, great. But either way, we see so much less engagement with the jobs in our platform that do not list salary. People they just want to know. And so if you're hiring, be transparent with the way you pay people.
That is fantastic advice. Yeah. Because a lot of times people can be a little shy about that. And
and I get it, right? It's like, ooh, is everyone going to see this? Are we going to lose our competitive advantage? I don't really think that doesn't really make any sense these days. Certainly job seekers are not interested in that. So
yeah. Well, it's good. Again, I think we kind of keep coming back to this theme of respect the candidate's time.
100%. Yep.
If you're not going to give them information that they want at the beginning of their search, they're not going to click on your job description, not going to click on your link. So.
Yeah. There's lots of other opportunities out there. So you might as well put it all out there.
Yeah, definitely a candidate's market right now. That's for sure.
100%.
Well, this has been so much fun, Kristi. I know you and I could talk all day. We'll wrap up with one final question, and because this is a podcast about medical money matters. So I always like to bring it back to some metrics, and I like to say, how do we measure and know that we've gotten where we need to go? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, key performance indicators and how your clients or how you help your clients measure success with recruitment.
Yeah, KPIs in the recruitment space are funny. They're in some places completely non-existent, and in some places, I mean, there's a lot of variability to it. The long and short of it is, I think a number that people should understand, especially for some groups that are hiring and don't all the time, is this time to fill number. So, depending on, obviously the size of the market we're recruiting to and what the requirements are for the position, but in general, it's going to take you a year to hire a position.
Okay, good.
So if you want a KPI, I mean, you could benchmark recruitment. If you hired in less time than a year, you're doing great.
Yay. Yeah.
And then, I mean, as far as like internal goes, hold your teams accountable and your clinical staff accountable to tapping their networks. Again, the power of the referral in this space is a lot. And if people aren't seeing this in a Google search, they got to hear about it from somebody. And so if you have a really happy group of people, get them talking about you in their circles. So anyway, and the effectiveness of recruitment strategies, so highly variable, but yeah, I think it has to come down to how long it takes you to hire somebody. That's something you should really be looking at, but make sure that you're planning well in advance these days. Yep. So let's work out for you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for such a comprehensive conversation about recruitment. Our audience is going to have a lot to get out of this episode. Kristi, we'll make sure that we get your website into the show notes and also your contact information so everybody listening can find you. And thank you so much again for being with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So nice.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Medical Money Matters podcast. Before you go, let me ask you, are you ready to take your medical group's coding to the next level? Because that's where Code Mastery comes in. Code Mastery isn't just another coding program. It's the ultimate physician-to-physician training solution to maximize your revenue and empower your physicians with the skills they need to code confidently and win the coding game. From comprehensive high-octane training to actionable insights, Code Mastery gives you the edge you've been looking for. Don't leave money on the table. Visit healtheps.com/code mastery to learn more and take control of your coding today. Let's transform your practice's financial future starting now. See you next time on the Medical Money Matters podcast.